We're going to have an interview tonight with Brian Willson, who is, as many people say, a fierce activist who's been busy activating on a lot of different levels for quite a while. And he's recently published a book. I don't know if it's his first book. We'll find that out. And he's got somebody who's doing a documentary of him, and that's going to be coming up real soon. There's going to be a showing at the first of next month, into the 3rd. We'll talk about that and put up the logistics for that so folks can to go to this. And I imagine that he'll be there to talk to people. But welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. You've been on once before, at least once. I know you've been on to Carmen DeBella's show out at Metro East, Veterans for Peace, hosted by Dan Shea. And since you've been an author and doing all these things for a while, you're very comfortable with the media, and that's good to know. But I don't know where we should start. Probably The Blood on the Tracks was the book, and what was the name of the documentary?
The name of the documentary is "Paying the Price for Peace: The Story of S. Brian Willson."
Right, and it's not you had nothing to do with it except that it's about your story. Then.
Yeah, a filmmaker read my book, "Blood on the Tracks," in 2011 and tracked me down and said he'd like to start doing a documentary about my journey.
Mm-hmm.
So he started filming at the end of 2011, and he's just finished it.
Wow.
Last month. Working on it 4.5 years.
I had no idea it was going on that long.
He has hundreds of hours of footage,
For an
plus
hour
a
and
lot
a
of
half.
historical archival footage. And I know nothing about making a movie. So all the work that it takes to weave all kinds of information and footage together. And I think it's been through 7 drafts, and getting changed, and he has a team of 4 or 5 people working with him, and it's all beyond me.
Had you seen the whole thing?
I just saw for the first time the final. I've seen many versions up to this point, but I saw the final on a big screen, which makes a big difference, much better than on a television screen, just last week. And it's 110 minutes. It's a long documentary.
It's almost 2 hours then, yeah.
And I guess I thought he did a pretty good job. It's hard for me to assess since I'm a fairly significant player.
Part of it, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different peace movement people interviewed in the film. We had a lot of different actions. So there's a lot about the peace movement in there, and a lot of historical footage from my life and from the lives of others. And
Vietnam, probably.
Yeah, although I didn't have any footage of me in Vietnam.
Right, but
stills.
Stills.
And the filmmaker used a lot of his own money to finish it. So he's like, I don't know, $100,000 of his own money, plus he's raised other money. It's really a low budget film for a feature length documentary. It could easily be $500,000 or more.
Sure, well, he's not
It's going to be under that. It's going to be under that. So we'll see. The first showing is here in Portland is July 3rd, Sunday, July 3rd at 7 p.m. at the Clinton Street Theater.
I think we have a graphic for that. We can get that up here one of these days here, and we can check it out.
And it really isn't going to be out really a lot until the filmmaker knows which film festivals it's going to be in, and he won't know that till probably September, October, maybe August, September, and then he'll start scheduling it in certain theaters around the country, and it's also now being translated into Spanish, so it'll be shown in Central America.
So are you going to be there at the showing here on the 3rd?
Yeah, I'll be at the showing on July 3rd.
I took for granted you were, but
it's only 3 miles from my house.
Yeah, so you can ride your bike down
The
there.
producer will be there, the filmmaker and the social producer will be there, and I'll be there, and whoever shows up.
Well, it'll hold 200 people, so it'll probably be
220 people, yeah.
Well, maybe we'll bring in some of the Rocky Horror Picture crowd. Left over from the night before. That thing's still going on since the early 80s. Hard to believe.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a really, really good showing. and folks show up and can have a chance to talk to you. The folks that aren't watching tonight, that is. Well, we should start at the beginning. I mean, you started out as so many people, activists I've talked to, in the who are veterans or who are now standing up for peace, started out in the service. I think you were in the Marines, weren't you?
No, I was in the Air Force.
Oh, Air Force.
I chose the Air Force to be the least possible problematic service for me. I didn't really want to be in the war, heavy in combat. I was in graduate school when I got drafted.
That's right. There was a draft. There wasn't a draft women now, I understand.
That's okay. Well, they have to register for the draft. There's no draft.
Right, but they have to register.
And as far as I'm concerned, they should have a draft, but everybody's required to be. And I hope they have a draft. They will never have a draft again. They know better.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like for them to have a draft so we can actually have a movement again, an anti-war movement.
That's why they did away with it, I think.
That's exactly right. Anyway, I had grown up conservative like most of my peers in the 40s and 50s, McCarthy era.
Mm-hmm.
So our military experiences, for some of us, awakened us to a reality we didn't understand or know. But I was 27 in Vietnam. I had already been in the Air Force 2.5 years, over 2 years actually. And when they sent me to an Army base for special, what they call Ranger training, it was more like light infantry training, but I was in the Air Force, so I was like, what's this about? And I don't know why they selected me, because I was not motivated to be in something like that. But I was in the military, you're ordered, you follow orders.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, yeah, that's what the Army and Marines were
I'd
for.
been a straight dude. But in this training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, I found that I could not and did not do the bayonet training. And that was the first clue I had that maybe there was another dimension to me that I hadn't known about. I found it so repulsive to fix the bayonet on the M16, and then there was a dummy in front of each of us, and we were supposed to plunge the bayonet in the dummy and scream "kill" as loud as you can 100 times.
My gosh.
And everybody's doing it. And I was like trying to get myself to do it, but it just seemed so repulsive to me. I never did it, but it didn't seem to matter. I still graduated from the school without having done that. And then I was in Vietnam in '69, so.
That's when it was at its peak, wasn't it, pretty much?
Yeah, '68, '69. But that experience just completely changed my life. I was just shocked at what I was witnessing in Vietnam. Appalled, shocked, devastated.
That might be the best word, because it completely changed you.
Yeah, I saw so many Vietnamese villagers bombed, napalmed, and burned. More than half children, hardly any men. It was daytime bombing, and I couldn't believe it. It was like, but I had to get to the bottom of it. I was kind of suicidal for a few days, and I was a lieutenant, and I had the option of going to Tan Son Nhut, which is Saigon, from where I was stationed, to do more homework about this bombing history. So I would hop a plane, get to Tan Son Nhut in Saigon, and meet with our intelligence officials. And after a consultation with them, they agreed with me, and I agreed with them after this long meeting, that what we were doing was intentionally bombing inhabited, undefended villages to achieve body counts. This was right after Nixon was elected. He called it Vietnamization, turning the war over to the Vietnamese as if they hadn't been already in the war for a long time.
For centuries.
But they were given more planes and more munitions, and they were supposed to make it so that we could be pulling out U.S. troops, which we started in '69 doing. But the way they achieved the body counts where I was, which was in the Mekong Delta, was just bombing inhabited villages. Everybody was killed in the village.
So was those body counts, was that for the media? So they could report
Well, it was
success back home?
for domestic politics. which was reported by the media
Right.
and proudly proclaimed by the president, that we had killed X number of VC, all of which were basically mothers and children, or most of them. But when I realized that and discovered that, I became firmly anti-war while I was there, and I knew I was on good ground, because this was unconscionable, illegal, violation of the Geneva Conventions, the United Nations Charter, and so forth. And I had been drafted out of law school, so I had already some legal background.
Right, and you had the words for it too.
Yeah, and so I had confidence that I could speak out against the war and be on solid ground. I was not the type of person to ever think I would do that. But, life's a journey.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen. So that started really my activist life, and it's never really stopped. When I realized it was all a lie, and that probably everything I'd been told about history was probably not true.
Told by the winners.
Yeah, told by the conquerors.
Yeah.
And so I've become a history student and an anthropology student, psychology student, trying to understand better the human condition, my own journey. And that just led to more understanding of the structural kind of causes of injustice, both domestically and internationally, and why there's so much suffering and misery, that there's a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to understand it because I had been so ignorant when I went to Vietnam, so ignorant. And I was in Vietnam a month ago for the first time since I was sent over there in '69.
I've seen your stuff on Facebook.
And so it was a really powerful experience, 3.5 weeks. But I realized that when I was in those villages in '69, all those bodies I saw on the ground were the consequences of my ignorance. And that has been a motivation for me to recover from being ignorant and from being basically I call myself a recovering white male.
Mm.
The conditioning of a white male and the patriarchal history of modern civilization is pretty intense. And it's a very comfortable place to be psychologically, except it's not authentic. It's a concocted view of the world through the mind of a superior person, and I realized I was not superior, I was not authentic. Being in somebody else's village, looking at their bodies, and they were not in my village. I was in their village. Well, that seemed to be kind of a strange thing to me all of a sudden. What was I doing in their village? And so, so anyway, it's been 47 years since I was in Vietnam, 46 years since I've been out in the military. And most of those years I've been doing something around dealing with justice and peace issues. I did finish the law school, took the bar exam, became a lawyer, and found out that I couldn't even adapt to the protocol of the courtroom. I wasn't intending to be a screw-up, but when I heard the bailiff say, "Everybody rise," in my first case, I don't think I'm going to rise. I mean, it wasn't so cognitive, it was a strong feeling like, wait a minute, I did that before. That's not a good thing for me to do, to be automatically obedient, stand to attention. It wasn't nothing to do with the judge, but it had to do with the symbolism of being a devotee to an authority system.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even thought it through. It was so visceral. But that led to my leaving the law certainly as a courtroom lawyer, and one thing led to another, and I didn't have a career then. But not having a career is a big advantage because it leads to a lot of interesting new experiences that aren't dependent upon high salaries. You don't have to maintain a lifestyle that's dependent upon the salary that I might have become accustomed to as a lawyer. So one thing led to another, and here I am 47 6 years later, and I'm still alive. I'll be 75 on July 4th. And it's like, wow, a lot of birthdays have gone by, and I really haven't had a job in a hierarchical structure since I left the military.
Mm-hmm.
I always dreamed I'd have just a nice, comfortable, straight job with a good pay, and that has not been the case.
Well, you weren't planning on being an artist. And an author is an artist.
Yeah, no, I wasn't planning to be an activist either.
That too. I don't know if I guess you could make a case for activists or artists as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but I know that when you came back, what you were saying about earlier about the white recovering white male, it seems to me that it's the one word that would bring all that together is the word entitlement.
Right.
And you experienced that, the entitlement.
Yeah,
of
and
the
it was
justice
all
system.
working for me
Mm-hmm.
until I realized it was just total BS. It was it's just not, it's a lie, but it's a diabolical lie.
Mm-hmm.
And it means I wasn't able to see things clearly or feel things accurately. And so when you feel like you've been betrayed by your church, by your government, by your parents, by your school, it's a lot of motivational energy to try to figure out something else to do with your life rather than continually be betrayed and follow the rules that were guiding this betrayal system. And when I realized that, really basically feel like you've been incested by your government. You've been really screwed in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been abused like cannon fodder. So those are all motivational understandings, you know. You say, well, no, now I have to walk a different path. I have to walk a path of truth-seeking, telling the truth as best I know, and not the way the textbooks told me, or my parents told me, or the church told me, or my politicians told me. I have to go by my experiences and kind of what I'm sensing. I read a lot of books and talk to a lot of other people that, of course, have had these transformational experiences, and you start feeling validated in your new path, and you proceed.
And that path isn't a straight path.
No, it's not straight at
all
all.
over the place.
Yeah, that's right. It's not linear, but it's definitely full of a lot of content that's pretty meaningful.
Now, speaking of a circuitous, I shouldn't even try to say that word, path, I think almost immediately it led you to South America and Central America.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it did in the 80s. I started realizing that what we were doing and reading the language of the president relating to Nicaragua and El Salvador and other countries in Latin America, realizing that Guatemala, that the language just code words for exploiting people, making sure that popular movements can't prevail because we basically are using these countries as kind of our backyard profit providers, controlling the oligarchy in those countries and maintaining those oligarchs stay in power. So when I realized that, I started going to Central America a lot, and that ultimately led to my going to Concord Naval Weapons Station in 1987, which was the source for all the weapons that we were sending to Central America, the largest Pentagon weapons depot on the West Coast. And that's where we created in 1987 something called Nuremberg Actions, following the Nuremberg principles, which after World War II, which suggested that if you discover that your government is participating in crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against peace, you have an obligation to interrupt it.
And those things you mentioned are delineated in the United Nations.
Yes.
I mean, they're on documents that the
right.
United States have joined.
That's right. So, so we started a blocking action at Concord, blocking the movement of the munitions that were going on trucks and trains from the bunkers where the munitions were stored 3 miles on road and track to the ships in Suisun Bay, Sacramento River, that were going to be taken to Central America.
And by your research, they were going to suppress the people.
Yeah,
and
I had been down there many
government.
times. I had already lost people I'd met in El Salvador and Nicaragua. They'd been killed by the death squads, or the Contras in Nicaragua, the death squads in El Salvador. The U.S. was funding the Contras and the death squads. And we had plenty of proof of that, just
Mm-hmm.
looking at congressional appropriations.
And I'm sure the drug trade played a lot in
Yes,
all
the
that
drug
too as
trade was
well.
involved, but the main thing that concerned me was campesinos were being killed, maimed, and you know, displaced, and that's just not.
Just like in Vietnam.
It just not. It just can't be justified.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started blocking those munitions, and there were a lot of arrests. And I decided, well, the year before, in '86, I had joined 3 other veterans on the steps of the Capitol in a water-only, open-ended fast in protest of Reagan's
In
policies.
D.C.
In D.C. on the Capitol steps. And we went 47 days with no food, and we stopped because one of our veterans was getting near death. And although we had never intended to really ever stop unless we found a groundswell of uprising across the
Which
country.
didn't happen.
Well, there was a lot of solidarity actions going on with our fast, maybe over 500. So we used that as a reason to stop the fast. But it was really because one of our members was getting near death. And then a year later, on the anniversary of that, starting that fast, I started with 2 other veterans to block the trains on the tracks on September 1st, '87. And that's when I got hit.
Well, hit meaning you got run
I
over
got
by
run
the
over
train.
by the train, and that was an inconceivable outcome. You know, the train speed limit was 5 miles an hour. The protocol was whenever there were demonstrators on the tracks, the police were called to make arrests and
Clear them out.
clear them out. There were 350 Marines whose job was to protect the trains, and they were armed and they were all around. But we were on a public highway, so they kind of liked the civil police to arrest us because we were actually on right-of-way of a public highway which bisected the base. You know, the base would be a few feet this way, a few feet that way, which was Marine jurisdiction.
It's like Fort Lewis up there. It's all right.
Yeah.
You know, civilians all around it.
So I had given the base commander notice 10 days in advance. We were going to start on September 1st, a 40-day water-only fast, not open-ended. There would be 3 of us, and we would not move for the trains voluntarily. We would have to be physically removed. Train speed limit 5 miles an hour. Penalty on the sign right near our vigil said, penalty for obstructing movement of federal munitions, $5,000 fine and 1 year in jail. So we knew what the penalty was. And so what happened on that day when we took our position, on the very first day of the 40-day fast, first train came just about before high noon, and I don't have any memory. Over 40 friends were there witnessing it, including the 2 other vets that were with me on the tracks.
So you must have been the first one closest
I
to
was
the train.
actually on the right-hand side between the rails, sitting on my rump. The other 2 were crouched on their feet, but they were crouched.
Well, so
and
they
I
were
was
able
sitting.
to move.
And at the last minute, the photographs indicate my right arm went down to the right rail, and it looked like I was just getting ready to bolt. I mean, it wasn't cognitive, you know. I never dreamed this was going to happen, but your autonomic nervous system pumps the adrenal gland starts pumping adrenaline, and it doesn't go to the brain; it goes to the muscles to move really fast. But I didn't do it in time, so I got completely run over by the train. The other 2 just barely escaped. Had 19 broken bones and fractured skull, lost my legs, broken elbows, broken wrists, right shoulders broken.
Oh, I didn't realize it was.
I had 100 stitches in my mouth. I had a partially destroyed right kidney. All these right ribs were cracked, all of them, I think. My left outer ear was sliced off and was sewn back on. But the main danger to my health was this skull fracture. And lost my right frontal lobe. And the only thing that saved me from dying was that my brain membrane stayed intact around the brain. It was lacerated by the piece of my skull that was dislodged and driven into my brain, but the doctors seemed to think that was like a shock absorber that enabled the membrane to stay intact around the brain and only got lacerated.
I'll be darned.
And they said that if the membrane had separated from the brain tissue, I would have died in 1.5 to 2 minutes of just a brain bleed. So, but for the fate,
It wasn't
I
the way it was
survived.
written.
I survived, and there were 5 photographers there, newspaper photographers, and a videographer. So I survived, and it was all documented. And of course, all this stuff is in the film that's coming out.
Right.
Has all that. That's pretty graphic, actually, because the videographer, who was my friend, who was a psychiatrist, who was an amateur videographer covering political actions. The only reason the video camera was there was because he was going to film our arrest.
Right. Video cameras were pretty new in those days, as far as
Yeah.
just everybody having one.
Right, and so he actually got it on camera, and that's what the FBI looked at to determine that the train speed was almost 17 miles an hour at the point of impact, more than 3 times the speed limit. And the Navy conducted a fairly thorough investigation, actually, and the Navy commander who conducted the investigation said that the train crew could see us for 650 feet and never tried to stop.
Didn't I hear somewhere? Maybe you said it that they got word that they were going to be boarded or something like that.
Well,
Or
they
just
had
make
orders.
that
They
up?
had orders that day. They literally had orders. Came out in the depositions in court. They had orders that day not to stop the train, and the fear was we were going to board the train. That is, hijack the train. Now, where would we take it? It's on 3 miles of track, and 350 armed Marines are on both sides of the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we were all committed to nonviolence, and it was just, that's when I was interrogated in the hospital, where I was for 29 days. One of the first questions the interrogator asked me was, "At what point did you plan to hijack the train?" I was like, "What? Would you ask me that again?" I said, "That must have been an idea that came from the government.
Yep.
It didn't come from us."
A revisionist history.
Yeah. So what happened was we learned that the year before, when we were fasting on the Capitol steps, we were put on the FBI's domestic terrorist watch list as under the sabotage statute.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, there was an FBI agent who refused to investigate us, and he was fired, and he went public when I was in the hospital a year later.
He went public a year later.
He went public a year later
Yeah.
when he was fired. He wasn't fired right away, but he was fired for his refusal a year earlier of investigating us, and he was appealing his firing, trying to get reinstated, and he'd been an FBI agent for almost 22 years, and he lost his pension over that, and we became good friends over that, and he's quite a good clips of him in the film, in the documentary.
Did he get his pension back?
Nope, he never got his pension back.
Well, I know you sued, and the lawsuit was settled, so I would think that.
Yeah, he didn't get his pension
didn't.
back, but he and I have gone a lot of trips around the world together. We're really close. He's an amazing guy. He's one of my heroes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's been running a Catholic worker house in Peoria, Illinois for many years, and he's now in his late 70s, and he calls the U.S. flag the most violent symbol in the world.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with
Yeah,
that.
so
This is all for empire.
Yeah, that's right. So at any rate, but I was able to recover from all that, and I just kind of resumed my activities, and you know, about 6, 8 months later, I was back on the road. I was walking with, the first few months I was walking with 2 canes and 1 cane, and then I didn't even need a cane.
Mm-hmm.
And went back to Nicaragua and Salvador, and I spent time with the guerrillas in the mountains of El Salvador, and Went to the Middle East. I went to Gaza and West Bank 3 different times, witnessing all that incredible, unbelievable savagery by the Israelis. I went to Iraq after the bombing in '91 and spent a couple of weeks there looking at all the damage and kind of apologizing to the Iraqi people for what we had done because it wasn't done in my name. I went with 7 other veterans.
And we're continuing to do.
That's all we do. All we do is we're good at making bombs and dropping them. And now they're drones.
And not worrying about who.
No, it's not worried at all. We demonize them and feel good about it. We're the exceptional people. And of course, for some of us people that have a conscience, it's kind of very deeply eats at our stomach, and we realize how diabolical this exceptionalism is, and how much we easily demonize other people who we want to demonize because they sit on oil or a geostrategic route for pipelines or whatever. The audacity that they are interfering with our exploitation of global resources to maintain our insatiably consumptive way of life.
Yeah, how did our oil get into their country?
Yeah, exactly. The audacity that they would have our oil under their land.
Well, and this is since we pretty much reached towards the end of that saga here. It'd be a good time to play the video. That's a 9-minute clip that's compiled from the actual program.
From the film.
Documentary,
Well,
the film itself.
It was put together by the filmmaker. Although there's a lot different stuff in the film now than even that's in the trailer. But it gives you a flavor.
A feel for the and then we'll talk about the showing that's going to be July 3rd, day before your birthday.
That's right.
And we'll be back in 9 minutes.
To be a radical or a nonviolent revolutionary, you have to be willing to risk life, limb, and prison. You have to be willing to risk the consequences, because then you're free.
There are times when we are literally beaten to the ground and lose all kinds of things, but we have the capacity innate in us as human beings to rise again.
These munitions kill people, and we're responsible for it. We're responsible for stopping it. So we can speak our hearts with our bodies on our legs between these rails on that road.
Brian and I had made this commitment that you could either remove us or run over us.
Willson is in John Muir Hospital in Walnut Creek. He lost both of his legs last week when he tried to block a munitions train at the Concord Naval Weapons Station. Today he said he'll be back.
To throw a train at human bodies that were sitting on a track is insane. And yet the order wasn't questioned by anyone.
Violence is what built Western civilization. It's what built prosperity. It's what built oligarchic structures. And I don't want to be complicit in it. I walked as far as I could walk before the bodies were so thick I couldn't walk any further. And I looked down at my feet and I saw a young Vietnamese woman holding 3 children in her arms. But her eyes were open. When I looked in that woman's eyes, I knew it was all a lie. I knew the war was a lie, and I suspected everything I had ever been taught was a lie. I was on the wrong side. How could this be a good boy? I'm on the wrong side.
Most people are very shocked when they come to the realization that our government is a violent government.
I remembered the Declaration of Independence that talked about the merciless Indian savages, and I realized I was the savage.
These wars are a lie, these wars are a crime, these wars are immoral, and that every single active duty service member has the absolute right to refuse to take part in these wars.
Listen, brother, we're not just talking about occupation in Afghanistan, we're talking about the continued occupation of Iraq, we're talking about the illegal occupation of Palestine. All of these things are connected.
I do believe in nonviolence. Some people will describe people like myself as a peace warrior. You are trying to break the model of violence in response to violence. When I got struck by the train, it was bringing home to me personally and viscerally what happens to people all over the world when they stand up to power. This was no aberration, what happened to me. It's what happens constantly, and it just happened to me personally. That's why when I traveled after that, and I would go to different countries and meet with people who were in struggles, they would so dearly embrace me because they knew I was a Yankee that paid the price that they pay all the time for standing up to power. We're all one. We're all connected, and how could I be possibly participating in killing other people I did not know just because I was ordered to do it? So I learned how to be disobedient. The most important thing as we recover our humanity is to adopt nonviolence as a philosophy, not just as a way of expressing our opposition in the public spheres, but in our personal way of life. You do unto others as you want them to do unto you. It's basically called justice.
Whatever the Marine Corps could do to me for refusing, I could never live with myself if I actually followed orders.
Bradley Manning, who's in jail for over 2 years, did the world a great service by exposing the truth of war.
Come on, fire!
We as veterans have to talk about things. The hardest stories to tell are the ones that we need to hear. And those are the ones that the American public needs to hear.
What happened? What happened? You got hit. You got shot. What's your name? What's your name? Wake up. What's your name? What's your name?
The case of Scott Olson, the two-tour Iraq vet who joined the Occupy movement in Oakland and was severely injured by a police projectile, is not a new phenomenon. We had soldiers throughout history who have had metamorphoses through their military experiences, their war experiences, and come back to civilian society and said it was wrong. It's important for veterans to be in the movement because we have a certain wisdom about the nature of imperialism, the nature of warring against other people that we've demonized. People like Scott Olson, to me, is an inspiration because he's continuing the tradition of veterans saying no to this madness. That action inspired me to have that kind of courage and capacity to say no to this madness.
Yes, you can! Troops out of Afghanistan!
When there are people in the veteran community who come out and are so passionate about their resolve for peace and so willing to do more than just talk about it, but actually walk the walk, it's tremendously inspiring.
Occupation is a crime!
The vast majority of us are mute. It's too much trouble to dissent. If dissent is unpatriotic, then why are we sending all these people to die for these freedoms that we have?
We, the people, have got to stand up, get out off our asses and do something.
voting power is there to stop this madness. But it won't have itself revealed or felt unless we have more people willing to step forward and go against what they think is an opposing wind.
Save blood! Save blood!
Troops out of Afghanistan!
We have to continue to push back, and not let the government run our lives.
The consciousness of the world, I think, is igniting.
All right, well, welcome back. I think we're still all plugged in and ready to go. We got about 17 minutes left. We got a lot more to talk about, but first, before we forget, we'll mention that the full documentary will be on July 3rd at Clinton Street. We got a graphic for that. There we go, playing Price for Peace. And like he said, this was a 7-year project.
No, 4.5.
4.5. Probably seemed like 7. As you see, there was that was a 9-minute clip of a 110 minute documentary, and you're going to have to, you know, bring your A game to that one. If you saw some of that footage, there's going to be more of it of those children that were.
Well, there's a lot of uplifting stuff in the film too.
Hopefully, there's more than the other, but you know, there needs to be a lot more uplifting because actually, you know, more people are good people that aren't willing to go to the war necessarily and bomb for oil or bomb for the capitalist 1%, which is basically this is the way it's always been.
Right.
People going to war and dying to support, you know, a small percentage of the population that run the show and are able to indoctrinate the population. This probably goes back to the Chaldeans and the Assyrians, you know, all the way back.
It actually goes back probably 6,000 years.
Yeah, this is the same situation. What we have now is a corporate aristocracy, as I call it.
That's right.
It's no different than the aristocracy
That's right.
in feudal times. And it's nothing different about it whatsoever, except that they've got a better PR machine now.
Yeah, they have a fantastic PR machine.
Yeah,
they have a lot of people kind of addicted to a way of life that they can't really condemn the system too much for interfering with without interfering with their own life, because we're not very independent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't grow our food anymore. We've lost extended families and tight-knit communities, and so we don't. Sharing is really an important part of the human evolution, and now with materialism and individualism, it's almost like the social compact has been almost eliminated. It's all about individualism, making your money and buying whatever you need.
Driving your car, working on your computer, looking at your phone.
It
just keeps moving you in that
so it isolates
isolation.
you. It isolates you more and more, and that is not healthy for the planet or human beings. Because we are socially, we are designed by evolution to be social beings, to be cooperators, to be engaged with activities with one another around food and celebration and art, but not to work for the man for a wage. That is very new in human history.
Like I've seen on Facebook, you know, you still need to sing and dance.
Right.
And even there, you know, people dance. They dance out on the dance floor with somebody. I mean, off to themselves. Whereas, you know, you watch the things on Channel 10 or whatever, and it's everybody's dancing.
Yeah.
They're dancing together.
So, you know, we're facing, of course, because nature bats last, and I call this warming. It's now quite dramatic warming. I call it a correction. It's a Gaia or Mother Earth correction, dealing with all the carbon molecules that we keep emitting that destabilize the atmosphere that's been somewhat stable for thousands or millions of years. And it is the way that the Earth rebalances things. It may mean that we are become extinct, but since we have not considered ourselves as part of nature, we've been considered ourselves separate from and dominant over nature for really since the Ice Age. And that's an epistemology that really warps our capacity to understand the holistic nature of how everything works together.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're separate from nature, and nature bats last, if we don't kind of recover our sense of nature, we're out. We're going to be out. We're going to be outed.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if individuals do, we might be outed
That's
because
correct.
of what the group does.
That's correct. So it's at a very critical evolutionary moment in human history.
Mm-hmm.
Either we come to an awakening, a zeitgeist, where maybe the vast majority of people in the world, or certainly the first world, which is most in denial, realize that we're committing suicide with our way of life. It's ironic that the Cold War, where we armed ourselves to defend the Western way of life from what we called the evils of communism, that way of life that we're preserving with all these weapons is the actual lifestyle that's killing us. Isn't that ironic?
Mm-hmm.
We're actually preserving a way of life that is killing life on the planet. Well, that isn't smart.
And it's been done many times in the past,
That's
but
right.
not on a
but
global
now
scale.
now it's global.
Mm-hmm. Now there's nowhere to run to.
That's right. So it's a moment to regroup around what it means to be a human being on a planet that is finite, and that we have altered the atmosphere and even the geological structure of the Earth.
And the hydrological structures.
That's right. And so it's reckoning time. It's we've been living in an age of entitlement, and now we are facing the era of consequences. And that can be a great teaching moment in evolutionary history.
Mm-hmm.
Will we heed the warnings and go deep inside and recognize that maybe our empathy and our sense of fairness, our sense of cooperation, which are really archetypal attributes of early human evolution, they're all in us, because you can't get rid of them. They're part of almost the genetic code.
I'd say it would be genetic.
But
yeah.
we've been conditioned in our cortex to adopt a certain way of life to be successful or to be admired or to be rewarded. And that way of life is, as I discovered in my own case, is not authentic. It's a phony baloney thing. It's comfortable because that's what I've been taught is the way to be in my society, but it led in my case to seeing the consequences of that ignorance when I looked at those bodies in Vietnam. I was looking at the consequences of my ignorance, and I fell in love with those people in a way. I realized that those people are the people. They're kind of my family.
They're the people.
They're people, and I feel connected to them. I didn't feel connected to the pilots and the other soldiers I was with. I mean, I said, wait a minute. So it was an epiphany. It shook me to my soul. And a lot of veterans do have those kinds of experiences, either then or later. Not the majority, probably, but there are some. And perhaps that's what needs to happen to the whole culture now that the Earth is kind of warming up and threatening all of us with flood drought cycles and temperatures that are not even going to be, they'll be uninhabitable. Arizona's supposed to be 124 tomorrow.
I heard 119, but either one.
Well, the other day they said it was going to be 124. Maybe it's gone down to 119 now, but it doesn't matter. It's
Cool.
all moving up. And so I know that to change the little paradigm box in our brains is tough because we get used to that paradigm. It's comfortable because it's familiar. Now it's time to recognize that little familiar, comfortable box is out of date.
It's out of whack.
It's
too.
out of whack.
Yeah.
And it's holding us back from being the kind of compassionate, right livelihood people that can look at each other and realize we need to share now with one another. How are we going to proceed? We may not survive, But in the meantime, maybe we can learn about compassion and empathy.
Mhm.
Maybe that's what
That's the
what we
lesson.
need. To discover that. Maybe we went all this way in evolution to discover those early archetypes. You can't ignore them.
Well, like John Trudell says, we all came from tribes.
That's right.
It's all in there somewhere.
That's right.
And it's, I've said this on the show before that, we call them savages. I guess Rousseau called them the noble savage. But the folks in those ancient tribes and all, they took care of each other.
Right.
There weren't nobody begging.
And they lived with the rhythms of nature, because that's what you did.
Yeah.
You were part of nature. Now, when I left Vietnam, I was ordered home early because I was speaking out against the war as a
They
lieutenant.
didn't want that.
And I told my superior, who was a colonel, maybe the day before I left the country, I told him that Thomas Jefferson had coined the words in the Declaration of Independence, which I knew because I had studied the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution in law school, the wording. He coined the words, the merciless Indian savages, in the context of interfering with the settlers in upstate New York. And I told my colonel boss, I said, now I know who the savages were.
Yeah, he was just pointing in the wrong direction.
And we're the savages.
Mhm.
And I said, that is quite something to have discovered that when I'm 27 years. I'm sorry, I was then 28 years old. I turned 28 in Vietnam. Of course, he knew I was on my way back to the States, and he was not very smart anyways,
Yeah.
but
well, at least as we called them, the savages, at least they didn't give us chicken or smallpox blankets.
Yeah, I mean,
It was a whole different.
So, we've had it upside down from the very beginning.
Mhm.
And it's fatal. It's fatal to not understand we're part of a holistic weave of life. And to demonize Iraqis or Syrians or Palestinians or anybody.
Or gays or
Or
whatever.
gays or
Yeah.
blacks or my own family, was always calling names to the Italians, to the blacks, to the Jews, even the Catholics.
And the Irish at one time.
Yeah, the Irish. And I was a jock when I was growing up, so I wasn't that involved in ideological discussions. But I remember thinking later, when I kind of had more maturity and had been awakened,
An
I
experience.
thought, wow, those things my parents were telling me were really terrible. how they were describing people they didn't even know. We lived in a lily white rural community. We didn't have any black families, any Jewish families.
No gay people.
No, certainly not. If they were, they wouldn't have even been identifiable.
Yeah.
And even if there was my dad found out there might have been somebody that goes to the Unitarian Church, he would call him a communist.
My dad called me a communist one
Well,
time
my
because I
dad called
stuck
me
up
a
for the
communist.
natives.
My dad called me a communist too.
Yeah,
But,
so, what you were talking about, we got less than 5 minutes here. What you were talking about a while ago, that we don't feed ourselves, we don't do any of this. This food comes from all over the country. It's basically we're dependent upon civilization.
we're dependent upon oil.
And oil. And
Burning carbon for almost everything we do each day, all day long.
And that's what the
From
civilization.
electricity, yes, that's what we call civilization. Transportation, communication, food system. It's all now, for 100 years, the blip, from 1 century blip of oil, it's all dependent on burning carbon, which does what? It emits carbon molecules into the atmosphere. Now I just read today that it's going to go over 400 parts per million as an average for the planet. It has hit 400 at different moments. Now it's going to be over 400 as an average. And well, it's you can't argue with physics.
And that civilization, it's extremely fragile, and that's what's gonna
That's right.
individuals may not go, but that civilization, like Derek Jensen's out with his books.
It's dependent upon everything working just right with the technology and our cooperation and complicity.
Our cooperation, yeah.
So we really need to extricate our complicity with the system, which means we have to look to one another and start saying, like they did in Occupy in the camps in 2011, wow, this system is really screwed up. It's destroying life on the planet. It's destroying my life. It's totally predatory. what are we going to do about it? And it started a dialogue that led to a discussion about class, which led to this 1%, 99%, which has stuck in the conversation in the country. And what we see now with groups like Black Lives Matter and Rising Tide, which is blocking coal trains, that's all, I believe, an outgrowth of the spark provoked by Occupy, which really terrified the system. There were 2,700 Occupy camps in the United States, 2,700.
Overnight, almost.
Overnight, and it was spontaneous. It wasn't organized. It was a ripe moment. And although it was destroyed by November of, the camps were destroyed in November of 2011, between November 12th and November 15th, almost all of them were destroyed. Very organized campaign by the authorities. It sparked something in the consciousness of many people in the nation, which I don't think can be eliminated. That it brought an awareness about just how unjust and unfair our system is. Even Bernie Sanders' campaign is perhaps, all the young people that are supporting Bernie perhaps also was sparked by Occupy or provoked by Occupy.
That was an educative moment.
It really was, and I was thrilled that it was happening. I've been waiting 40 years for something like that.
Speaking of educative moment, we're down to a little over a minute and a half. Your documentary is going to be, when is that going to be again? Before we forget.
Well, the Portland premiere is July 3rd, Sunday night at 7 p.m. at the Clinton Street Theater in Southeast Portland. I don't know the address. It's on Clinton and
26th.
26th. The filmmaker will be there. The social producer will be there. I'll be there. It only seats 220. Maybe we won't have that many people. Maybe we will. I don't know. But that'll be an opportunity for more people to see it. You can buy the DVD online for $25. I really love seeing the film on a big screen. It's a very different experience than watching it on TV. I did watch it on the big screen for the first time last week, and what a difference from having seen it once before on a TV screen.
So it'd be well worth it. So we're down to less than a minute, quite a bit less than a minute. So that Paying the Price for Peace is a Facebook page as well.
Correct.
So they can
and
go there.
And it's built on my book, The Blood on the Tracks, The Life and Times of S. Brian Willson, that was published in 2011, which is also available online. And there may be some even copies at the Clinton Street. I don't know. I only have one left myself. The publisher has more, but I don't have them.
All right. Well, we're down to about 20 seconds. I want to thank the crew. They were in there pushing the buttons for us, and I want to especially thank Brian, who's had an interesting life, and he's trying to provide a little education for the masses here, and that's what we try to do on Public Access as well. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.